legislation to address the climate catastrophe that's unfolding before our very eyes. Here at home, I have a local committee, a local task force that's working on local climate issues. And then lastly, the ethics committee. It's where every complaint against my colleagues comes to our committee. And it's an evenly divided committee, an equal number of Republicans, an equal number of Democrats. I'm a member of the Democratic Party, and right now the Democratic Party holds the House majority and by a very slim margin, the Senate majority. But even our margin in the House of Representatives is really narrow. So it's difficult to get a lot of legislation passed because because it is so almost evenly divided. It's evenly divided in the Senate, and we've got a 5-seat margin in the House. So these are very slim margins. Last thing that I want to say before Mr. Stepp, I turn it back to you so that we can begin our dialogue. While a lot of the attention happens around the work that we do in DC, I have an El Paso office. I literally go back and forth. So I'll be here all week. On Monday, I'll be in DC for 2 weeks. I'll come home for 2 weeks. Same thing in June and July, et cetera. So it's a lot of back and forth. But my local office really works on constituent issues and outreach and on local projects. So, it's almost like existing in two worlds. The DC world is very different. It's super quick. Everything is fast. Lots of high drama, unfortunately. And because I serve on twice as many committees as most members of Congress. Most members of Congress get 2 committees. I'm very, very honored to have 4 committees. And the Speaker of the House really directs a lot of that. There's lots of hot competition at the beginning of each session about who will get what committee, and I'm really fortunate I got the committees I wanted. But while there's a lot of attention on national news on what's happening in DC, we do so much good work as well here in El Paso. And I'll close by saying this. If any of you ever have a need for help, answers with the federal government, with a federal agency, whether that's questions around passports or the IRS or the VA or Social Security, that's what we do at the local office in part. We open up casework to try to help constituents get answers to their questions. So that's a whole lot of information, I know, in a brief an opening, but I really am looking forward to a deeper dive on any subject that you all would like to talk about. Foreign affairs, domestic affairs, local affairs. Would love, just am really looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thank you again, and thanks for really bringing up the constituent services. I find that it's something that I teach about in my classes. I find that students know that a representative's job is a big part of it is to turn bills into laws and things like that, but they don't usually know just about all the constituent services that are offered. So thank you for sharing that with us. I wanted to turn to a slightly more serious subject. There was a leaked draft of Associate Justice Alito's opinion, legal opinion, that would effectively overturn Roe versus Wade. I've had many students who have expressed concern. I wanted to ask you, what is your reaction? What can be done? What can you do? What can students do who are passionate about a woman's right to choose?
I have to tell you, it's been hard for me to think of little else since then. I have a daughter. My daughter I've got 2 kids. I've got a 25-year-old son and I have a 23-year-old daughter. And actually a colleague put it into this perspective and it made me think about my own family. But the reality is, if this draft opinion ultimately is what becomes law of the land, my daughter will have fewer rights than I did growing up. And that is a really, I think, tragic statement in 2022 in the United States of America. That in fact, what is happening right now is that there is an erosion of rights and liberties that are afforded to Americans. And here's what I want folks to understand, because I know that abortion can be a very difficult issue. It's, it's it was a tough issue for me to discuss with my mom for many years. I lost my dad 25 years ago, and so I lost him long before I got into politics. But my mom, thank God I still have her. And I was raised in a very traditional Mexican Catholic household. And in my home, abortion was seen as a horrible, terrible thing. And I am not pro-abortion, but I believe that every person deserves the right to make decisions about their future with their doctor, about their healthcare future with their doctor, about their body with their doctor. And what limiting a woman's access to that does is it essentially gives women second-class status. And here's the added issues that we're going to face, that women are going to face, should this ruling become the law of the land. Should it no longer be a draft, but should it actually be the law of the land? Here's what we know. When women have to take pregnancies to term, and I will tell you, every single woman I've ever spoken to over decades who's ever had an abortion, it was a very difficult decision for her. And it was a decision that she had to reach with her doctor and that she had to live with long after the decision. But women who are not allowed to have that kind of reproductive freedom generally have lower educational attainment levels. So college students have to drop out, high school students have to drop out, or they have to juggle motherhood and education. And frequently, it's not as successful as it could have been. Poverty rates increase in populations that don't have access to reproductive freedom. And those poverty rates are generally multi-generational. And so when you think about a community like El Paso, where we already have economically disadvantaged households throughout the community, where we have lower educational attainment levels, basically this could set families back. And if we really truly wanted to decrease the number of abortions, there is a solution to that. I mean, and I want to say, no government will ever eliminate abortions. It's just not going to happen. What governments do is eliminate safe access to abortions. And so, but if we really do want to diminish the number of abortions anywhere, then what you do is you increase access to contraceptives and information. And that means you teach sex education in the schools so that young people understand the obligations and consequences that come with sexual activity, and access to contraception helps prevent unwanted pregnancies. So, that's a whole lot of information to say that this isn't just about a woman's right to choose her future or her reproductive freedom, but this is really about long-term consequences for communities and for families, and it could have really dire negative effects. We're not going to change the outcome of the Supreme Court decision, but this is why elections matter. And this is why electing people who represent your values is so important. When you don't engage in, and I'm not telling you how to vote, but I am telling you that your right to vote is precious and important and powerful. And it can determine the outcome of how your life is impacted and how the life of your community is impacted.
Mm-hmm. Would you support adding justices to the Supreme Court and eliminating the filibuster in order to do that?
Yes, I absolutely do. The last couple of Supreme Court justices, actually the last 3 Supreme Court justices, the process was so without integrity. We know that during President Obama's administration, when there was plenty of time for him to nominate a Supreme Court justice, he was prevented from doing so by the minority in the Senate at the time, the Republican Party, in what was an unprecedented power grab. And I will tell you, even using that same standard, they ignored that standard when they rushed through Amy Coney Barrett in the waning days of the Trump administration, really weeks before the people were allowed to go to the polls to pick their next president. That seat really should have belonged to President Biden. And so I see that the process had a lack of integrity. I do think we should expand the court. I think there are other reforms we should put in place, including term limits, age limits, and other ethical guideline requirements. There is a need for reform in our country on a number of levels, and the Supreme Court is included.
Okay, I wanted to, this is a discussion I've had in my classes before, and we've had some quite passionate debate, and I just wanted to ask you, what would you say to, as a follow-up, what would you say to the criticism that, let's say the Democrat Party is able to add justices to the Supreme Court, and then the Republicans come along in the next election, and they add even more justices to the Supreme Court? How can we avoid that issue, if it's avoidable at all?
That is a great question. And my hope would be that in a bipartisan way, we could reform the Supreme Court. The problem is there is not there's not an equivalent desire to truly reform the Supreme Court in a way that would bring both parties along. It's just, right now, it's completely intractable. But I have some similar concerns. My fear is we expand the Supreme Court, and then, the Republicans take control, and then they expand, and we keep going. And that would be absolutely absurd, and it's untenable, and it's unsustainable. And that's why the reforms really have to be linked to something. If in the absence of bipartisan collaboration on this, really the best that we can do is, and President Biden did this, he had a group of scholars kind of come forward with ideas around reform, and reform that is rooted in either data or fact. So for example, if we look at population growth, maybe that's a way to measure what an adequate number of Supreme Court justices could or should look like on the Supreme Court. So there has to be some logic behind it, some real reasoning behind it, but that doesn't mean that scenario wouldn't happen. And the Senate has all sorts of traditions and rules and norms. And it seems like whenever one party is in power, and the Democratic Party is no different, certain rules are eroded or thrown out the window. And I will tell you, I think the Senate itself, that there needs to be some reform, because I don't think it's appropriate that itty bitty states in terms of population have an equal voice as states that have larger populations. I find that deeply undemocratic. I think it made sense when the founders were debating the issues that they were debating, but even then, I think their logic was rooted in something other than fairness and democratic values and principles. But I do think that if we were to make reforms, which are not possible because we don't have a large enough majority, then they'd have to be tethered to some kind of sort of independent recommendation.
Okay. Yeah. So sort of like that, the committee that President Biden formed. Okay. I know we're heading towards 3:30 here, and I saw that there's already a few people raising their hands. I will get to you in just a minute. I do want to switch gears real fast and talk about another very important issue, the conflict in the Ukraine. I read recently that you visited the border with Ukraine, and I just wanted to see if, what do you think the students here at EPCC should know? What did you see there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I had the incredible privilege of being on a bipartisan delegation visit to with some of our NATO allies. I had an opportunity to visit with Chancellor Olaf Scholz and with other great NATO leaders and European leaders. But we did spend part of our time in Rzeszów, Poland, which is near the Ukrainian border. And then we made the journey to the actual border. We visited a processing center where refugees are processed, talked to a lot of the folks working there, helping feed the refugees. And I will tell you, part of what was striking was just how similar in some ways the situation is to what's happening here at our nation's front door in El Paso in terms of the local communities really kind of stepping up to welcome and offer support and love and care and kindness to the refugees. It reminded me of El Paso and the way that El Paso has always responded in such a loving way. Obviously, there's incredible human misery, and I will tell you, some of the most shocking information was around very violent sexual assaults happening against women and girls by Russian soldiers, and it was really deeply horrifying, and it reaffirmed for me the work that President Biden is doing. And this is a really rare bipartisan moment in Congress where Republicans and Democrats are really standing together in wanting to fight for democratic values, democratic with a little d. But just to give you a little bit of perspective, 3 years ago, I was at the Munich Security Conference with the Speaker of the House in Munich, Germany. And at that time, it was a gathering of NATO allies as well. But it came on the heels of our then President Donald Trump really attacking NATO, trying to dismantle NATO, being highly critical of NATO, and sending an ambassador to Germany that was anti-NATO. And so when we landed, our goal was to participate in these transatlantic conversations to reaffirm our support for shared democratic values. But leader after leader after leader was telling us, we don't think that America stands for this transatlantic relationship anymore. And we feel like we're on our own and we're going to do our own thing. And those of us who were there kept trying to affirm to our allies, we have to stand together and we need to be united because we never know what threats are coming at us. And we are stronger together. We are stronger when we are united. Well, having been there, meeting with NATO allies, it was incredible. To a person, leaders told us how grateful they were for America's affirmation under President Biden for this transatlantic alliance. We've really turned a corner. And part of why Russia has not been as successful as they predicted they would be, and in fact, as successful as many other countries, including our own, thought they would be, is because of that incredibly strong alliance that was rebuilt. So I think one of the things that I want you all to know is that El Paso really came to mind as we met refugees and met with communities accepting those refugees. But also it really affirmed for me the need for us to teach our country about history, about World War II, about the horrors of authoritarianism and fascism, and why those of us who live in democratic countries, we're so lucky, we are so privileged, and we really have to affirm and fight for and work for those values every day.
Yes, very true. I just as a short follow-up, let's say we had a President Escobar. Is there anything that you would do differently, or do you generally think President Biden's doing everything he can?
There's a lot I would do differently. And I work with the administration, and I'm very proud of the work that they've done on many fronts. But I will tell you I'll give you all some insight that I haven't shared with anybody publicly.
Sorry.
But on immigration, as an example, I've told the White House and his inner circle and his team in these conversations that I've been having with them now for over a year and a half, that my view is he needs to lean in on immigration and talk more about it and tell the American people, basically, look, administration after administration, Congress after Congress has failed to adequately address what we're seeing in terms of migration in our hemisphere. And I'm going to do everything possible to address it in a strategic and humanitarian way, but there's no quick and easy solution. There's no snapping your finger and all of a sudden it's done. And frankly, we've tried it the Republicans' way. We've hardened the border. We've not passed immigration reform for 30 years. That doesn't work. We're seeing the fact every day, especially in border communities, that's not worked. So let's try something new and different. And I've encouraged them to kind of lay out a multi-step plan. But I just don't think the White House talks about it enough. I don't think they lean into it. And as a result, when you leave that vacuum of information, other people will come in with misinformation or will use xenophobia as a vehicle to get people angry. And I feel like that's not served him well. But so, yeah, there are things definitely that I would be doing differently.
Okay, thank you for sharing that insight. I had planned at about 3:30 to start opening it up because I have tons of questions. I could keep going, but I wanna share here. I did notice that let's see, I saw Professor Navarez had raised her hand, and then we'll get to Sebastian in just a second. But did you still have a question, Professor Navarez?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
This is going back to Roe versus Wade. Data presents that in such a divided country such as the United States, 70% of the population support Roe versus Wade. The idea of Roe versus Wade is based on a right to privacy, and that's an implied right. And every time the possibility of presenting an amendment to the Constitution to protect women's rights, it's usually done away with and thrown away. What do you think would be, because, like I agree with you, adding people to the Supreme Court can go both ways, but we're fighting with an issue about implied powers. That is not one of the enlisted powers in the Constitution. How can we change that?
That's a great question, Professor Nevarez, and I really appreciate it. The challenge for us right now, as I mentioned, is that we have such an evenly divided, in the Senate, it's a 50-50 Senate. In the House, we have a 5-vote margin. And in fact, it's getting slimmer. We're losing 2 more members. Actually, I'm sorry, 1 more member, Representative Antonio Delgado from New York. He's in a swing district. He was just picked by the New York governor to be her lieutenant governor. So we're going to go to a 4-vote margin. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult with such an evenly divided chamber, almost evenly divided chamber, to pass really anything that would be considered controversial, because even though we have the majority in the House, we have some very moderate Democrats who run in what are called Trump districts that Donald Trump won, but that elected a Democratic member of Congress. So right now, until the midterms happen in November. And November will tell us whether, you know, House Democrats retain control, whether Senate Democrats retain control, whether we expand our majority or shrink our majority, or whether the House flips or the Senate flips. We don't know what's going to happen in November. But these very slim margins make true transformative work nearly impossible. And it pains me and hurts me to say that simply protecting women would be considered transformative work. You know, it should be a no-brainer. We have countries that are far poorer than us, with even fewer civil rights than we enjoy, that allow for abortion for women. You know, we can't even get the Equal Rights Amendment passed out of the Senate. And so it comes down to elections. And until Democrats, because, you know, these are democratic values, enjoy a wider majority, we're stuck. Now, if Republicans, you know, win big in November, then I think we know what we can expect. I think they may federalize really banning abortion in every state. So it'll go in the other direction. And elections matter. They really matter.
Yes. And more than just the presidential elections, folks. That's one thing that we definitely emphasize. There are numerous elections where you get to have your voice in our system, and we need everybody to participate. Next is Sebastian. You can go ahead and ask your question.
I don't have a question per se, but I want to say thank you for thank you for noticing like the mail we sent you, Miss Escobar.
Oh.
Okay. Yes.
For letters, Sebastian, I really appreciate it. I will tell you, I love hearing from all of you. It is so important that I hear from my constituents. But I will tell you, young people definitely have a special place in my heart, not just because I was a teacher, not just because I'm a mom, but you are the future, and your voice and your opinion matters so much to me. So I want to thank all of you who took the time to reach out to me and write to me. I want to tell you how much I appreciate it.
You're
Thanks.
welcome. You're welcome. It's just like I'm normally not a person who's into politics. In fact, if I'm being 100% honest, I tend to steer a little bit away from politics, because honestly, it's very divisive, like how people react to politics. Like, there are some who are sensible, and there's some who are just like downright crazy, act a little bit a little crazy about it. But I thought what I wrote down I thought it's for a good cause, and to help the Ukrainian refugees here in the States.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And look, I get it. A lot of folks are not interested in politics. And in fact, for some people, politics is really it can be nasty, it can be negative, it can be toxic.
Yeah.
But honestly, politics is what we make it. And if we don't engage in with our government, if we don't vote, if we don't participate civically, then we leave it to others, and we become voiceless. And you know, I will tell you, it permeates every part of your life, everything, the kind of education you get, you know, whether you will be able to buy a home in the future, the kind of economy we live in, the kind of planet we live on, all of that, you know, especially in the US Congress, all of that, you have a say in, depending on who you elect to Congress. But as Mr. Stepp mentioned, it's not just, you know, kind of the government that attracts the most attention, Congress, but school board, EPCC board, city council, commissioners court. All of these elections are really important, because all these governing bodies have a direct say over your life and your future.
That is a good point, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Escobar.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Next, Oscar, did you have a question? You can go ahead and unmute your mic. Or did you write it in the chat? Let's see. Nope, I don't see anything in the chat. Oscar, are you there? Oops, I just lost my thing here. So we'll come back to you, Oscar. Next, one of the people who helped make this event happen, Professor Valles, did you have a question?
Hi, James. Thank you.
Hello.
To the Honorable Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here, for supporting our community, and for doing all the hard work you do. Congresswoman, I just like to share a little bit of my thoughts regarding the issue of the Supreme Court. And my thoughts are not just from an academic perspective, but also from the perspective of a woman. And the problem with the Supreme Court is a lot of people say, well, you know, it is the highest court in the land, and it's not supposed to be political, but it is. And that therein is where the problem lays. As long as it's the presidential appointees, it will continue to be an issue. And just listening to what you were talking about so eloquently just a few minutes ago, this is a never-ending story, dependent on who wins the bigger majority. And as to the issue of abortion, because really that is what pro-choice ultimately comes down to. A lot of my students are very anti-abortion, as many of us are. The problem is people need to understand that it's not necessarily about abortion in terms of women, as some Republican senators have mentioned, women who sleep around too much, etc. Abortion is a very controversial and elaborate phenomenon as a consequence of why women get abortions. There are older women who get them as a means of saving their lives. There are young women who get them because they have been raped. And there are little girls, 10-year-olds who menstruate, who get them because they have been victims of incest. That is something that needs to be discussed more fully. And Governor Abbott said, well, you were going to do away with rape. Well, until we do away with rape, then perhaps we should reconsider our standpoints specific to pro-choice. The problem also with the pro-choice results, which will probably be what happens, it will become some type of a law, is that it is a opening to our rights as citizens specific to privacy, whether we use birth control or not, whether we are gay or not, and I can just go down a long list of these types of predicaments. The other thing I want to say is that students need to understand that when politics is messy because of these dysfunctional aspects of what has happened in our country. And to really understand how severe it is, we need to go back to the very basics about what is democracy. It is a government for the people, by the people, and of the people. But that changes when we microsize it and say it's about my Second Amendment rights. It's about my believing abortion is bad and therefore nobody should be able to have access to it. So I just wanted to share that with everybody, and I thank you for allowing me to share that, Congresswoman. And if you have any reflections to discuss as to what I just said, I appreciate it tremendously. Thank you so much.
Professor Valles, I could not have said it any better than you did. I think you laid it out with tremendous clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you again for everything you do.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give Oscar another chance here. Oscar.
Hello?
Hi, Oscar.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, good afternoon, Congresswoman Escobar.
Hi.
I just wanted to know your general consensus about physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia in Texas and among our community.
You know, that's an issue I haven't thought a lot about in a long time. But I will share with you, I do think I mean, I am open to the idea. I do think that we do a lot to prolong life. And I have my own personal story about a loved one whose life was prolonged for years in a way that I know he would not have wanted it to be. And there are cases, I think, where prolonging life can be unnecessarily cruel because of the pain and suffering that is endured. And I think that there should be a certain amount of personal choice and consultation with a healthcare provider, a healthcare expert. But I'm not as well versed on any sort of legal theory or policy theory, and have not confronted it yet as a member of Congress. But I'd be very interested in learning more, and definitely learning the thoughts of the community around it.
Thank you,
for
Oscar.
the question, Oscar.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, sir.
Next, no problem. Thank you. Next, I want to turn it over to Miguel. I just want to say before he asks his question, we are all very proud of him. He applied for your internship, and I believe he received it. So, Miguel, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Professor Stepp, for introducing me, and thank you, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, for doing everything you do and being so passionate about your work, because this really reflects your character, and this really shows how much you care for our community. And I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Miguel.
My question is kind of regarding the Roe versus Wade thing that's going on. Since Congress hasn't passed any laws regarding Roe versus Wade in the last 50 years, that's why Scottish was able to overturn it in such a short notice. Now, since this is going to become a state issue, and since the Texas government has an amendment that will go into effect about a month after the decision is struck out, that will make abortion illegal unless the mother's life is in danger. And we have a tendency, our local government has a tendency of going against the state government's ordinances, as we obviously saw during the pandemic. What are our elected officials' plans what do they plan to do to protect our women's rights here in our local, in our city?
That's a great question. And just one correction. In Congress, the House has passed a bill known as WIPA, the Women's Healthcare Protection Act, which essentially codifies Roe v. Wade. We sent it over to the Senate. The Senate doesn't have the votes, a filibuster-proof majority. They need 60 votes. There's 100 senators. It's there's 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. But because of the filibuster, they need 60 votes. There's not 60 votes to pass WIPA. And so senators right now, Democratic senators, are kind of looking at what kind of narrow path could they use in order to try to pass some of WIPA that would protect women, at least in the case of incest and rape and certain cases. Here's the bottom line to your question, though, about what local officials are doing to try to protect women and women's reproductive freedom. The problem would not necessarily so much be local officials, because I think we have had a history of having had local officials that are willing to sue the state government when there's been overreach. I was in local government. I sued Governor Abbott in the past when I felt that, that he was acting unconstitutionally or unlawfully. But the problem is providers. So there will probably not be, I think we have maybe one or two doctors left in El Paso willing to perform abortions. I think one of them is moving to New Mexico. I think the other one, this will now, I don't know what's going to happen. So the problem really is access, because providers are afraid of being prosecuted. Providers are afraid of being targeted by their states and being run out of business, losing their licenses for violating laws. So that regardless of what local officials could potentially do, I think the problem is going to be access. We have, at the state level, we have a Republican-controlled legislature. You know, they put that bounty hunter law into place, where if you know of a woman, a doctor, a family accessing reproductive health or an abortion, there's someone can tell on them and get $10,000. I can't remember how much the money is. So the problem is we live in a, you know, for me, the problem is we live in a deeply conservative state that is targeting its own citizens. And so providers aren't going to want to work here.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to see if we can get to 2 questions. We'll see. Brianna?
I'll be succinct in my answer, I promise.
Brianna, did you have a question?
I know that there's a lot of encouragement to vote, like in every single level. But I wanted to ask, how is the community supposed to vote when there's like a lot of things going on, like in personal lives, in the workforce, like so many things, like even the pandemic, like a lot of people are like burnt out and stuff.
Yeah.
And like I do understand the importance. And like I've had history professors who have said that democracy is like probably the worst form of government because of how anyone is able to vote, and like not, unfortunately, like not everyone is like able to be educated, I guess. Like not everyone has the opportunity. And yeah, I just wanted to ask for recommendations.
You know, so during the pandemic, counties like El Paso did a really great job of creating drive-through voting, going late into the night in order to accommodate, for example, a lot of our healthcare workers who had different shifts. The problem is the Republican-controlled state legislature put in place obstacles to that. They basically outlawed 24-hour voting. They outlawed drive-through voting, things that would make it more convenient. They made mail-in ballot, voting by mail more difficult. Doesn't just impact people in El Paso, but it impacts people who live overseas, like our soldiers. If you can believe that, it makes it harder for them as well. And so, but to your question, you know, when people are juggling a lot of things, believe me, I think that's why voter turnout is low in communities like El Paso. People have 2 jobs, or, you know, they're trying to go to school and they're working and they might have children. And it feels like a, you know, really low on their priority list. I totally get it, Brianna, but I will tell you, ultimately, we get the government that we elect. And so if we don't engage, and if we have look at all the obstacles to voting that have been put in place. If you don't agree with that, you know, you've got to find the time to get to an early voting location, or on election day, to vote out people who do that. Right? I mean, that's within your power. That's within the realm of possibility. And the good thing is, in Texas, we still have early voting. So you've got about 10 days where you know, whatever day, and all over town, where all you need is your ID and you go and you vote. Obviously, you've got to get informed, and you should get informed before you do that. And with the internet, it's never been easier to find out about people. But if you have ideas, if there are obstacles that are preventing you, and if there's legislation we can write to try to help support folks like you with certain obstacles, we're willing to do it. But it also will take the initiative of each individual voter to get informed and get to the polls during early voting or on election day. Otherwise, we see the consequences of inaction.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you, Brianna. Okay, one last question. Sergio or Professor Sines, did you want to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi.
How are you? Thank you very much for, we feel so honored that you took the time of your busy schedule. I really, really appreciate your presence, and we're all proud of James that also was able to pull this off, which is hard. Uh, my question is regarding other issues. It's very, Roe versus Wade overrides everything, and probably the November election is the second item. Uh, but I want to ask about the economy, right? What is President? What is your role supporting President Biden's agenda on your day-to-day basis? What is Representative Escobar doing in committees and with the leadership trying to pass these $1 trillion stimulus packages and all these uh, what happened to the idea of free community colleges and all that? What's your role as a representative? Because my students would like to know what is your actual work, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Mr. Stepp, I'm happy to stay on like a few minutes extra because there's one more hand up, Zachary, and so I don't want to leave anybody without. I don't want to leave without having answered his as well. Because anyway, so let me get to the question about the economy, what my role is, and how how I'm helping kind of push an agenda. So let me tell you first and foremost, the work and the job is as involved as each individual member of Congress makes it to be. So to be perfectly honest, and here I'm like being super candid with you all, there are some members of Congress who just show up to work and fly back to their districts, they vote, and they'll show up to their committees, and that's that. But if you really want to make a difference, you will kind of try to move yourself in and get to the leadership table and come forward with ideas, come forward with suggestions, but also be willing to do the hard work of implementing things. And that's the way that I engage. I want to do as much as possible for El Paso while I am in office. I want to bring home as many resources as possible while I'm in office. I feel like that is my fundamental job. And the day that I'm just phoning it in, that's not going to happen. I'll retire at that point. But so during the appropriations process, as an example, when at the height of the pandemic, as we were debating the CARES Act, I was having Zooms, like back-to-back Zooms every day, meeting with hospital CEOs. What do you all need? What are you seeing? What are you not getting? I was meeting with nursing associations. What do you all need? What are you not getting? I was meeting with the restaurant associations. I was meeting with small business owners. I was meeting with neighborhood leaders. All of the information that I gathered in those weeks from home, I put it into my work in trying to impact the appropriations. And so as an example, one of the big issues for us during this with the stimulus money that I brought forward that came from the community was, well, not everybody in El Paso belongs to a bank and has a bank account. How are they going to get their stimulus money directly? Or small businesses? Not all of them have great relationships with bankers. Like, how are they going to navigate it? And that's when we were able, I was able to work with a group of like-minded members to say, hey, we need credit unions to qualify because credit unions get out into the community, or we need small community banks to be able to work with our folks, or micro lenders. And it was great. We were able to really impact the legislation that in a way that reflected El Paso and our needs and what I was hearing from the ground. So that's an example. I'll give you a second example. Ambassador Ken Salazar, who is President Biden's ambassador to Mexico, he brought together a group of high-level officials in Ciudad Juarez, New Mexico, Chihuahua, and El Paso. We met in Ciudad Juarez at the embassy, or at the consulate office, and we were talking about President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, which I was proud to support in Congress, and about whether we could align our priorities in our region to really maximize what we could get out of it. Well, what we discovered was there was not a whole lot of coordination. So Ambassador Salazar said, Veronica, I want you to lead a task force and get everybody together to pull down as much money as possible. So I'm leading this task force. We're about to publish a report with all the projects. We've gotten everybody together, from the governor of Chihuahua to the governor of New Mexico, everybody in between, everybody in El Paso, all our stakeholders, so that we can be as competitive as possible to pulling down the resources that we appropriated as part of the Biden administration. So those are two examples of how it can work. But all of this to tell you that it depends on the member, right? It depends on the elected official, because again, unfortunately, there are members of Congress who, again, will just show up to their committees or show up and vote and go home. It's a lot of work to do the work in DC and here, but it's great work. It's so satisfying and so just such a joy to be able to work this hard for the community and to deliver results. We're getting $600 million for the Bridge of the Americas. We're getting $600 million. What my push is now is implementing a new vision for our port of entry. How can we re-envision that port of entry? $600 million won't rebuild it, but how can we change things to make it more customer friendly, to make it more dependent on smart technology, to move people more quickly back and forth, to make it I'll give you an example, the example that I've given the Biden administration and that I've used with the task force. When you go to an international airport, it's beautiful, it's modern, and it's safe, and it moves tens of thousands of people every day. I want our ports of entry to be as beautiful, modern, and safe, and highly equipped, and customer service friendly as airports are. So that's the goal, and we're going to start with BOTA, with the Bridge of the Americas, and we're going to do everything we can with that money, and we're going to build that vision for all of our ports. So it's a joy. It's a joy to do it. So, Mr. Stepp, I know we're out of time, but I would love to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope that answered the question.
More than enough. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I do know we're out of time. Zachary, did you have a quick question?
Yes, I did. And thank you, Ms. Escobar, for giving me your time. Thank you for being my congresswoman. It's been a real honor. I'll keep it quick. In the face of Republican unwillingness and opposition to any kind of bipartisanship on everything, how do you continue to engage with your colleagues across the aisle without sacrificing the interests of your constituents in the name of a bipartisanship that isn't really returned?
Oh my gosh, Zachary, that is the thing that kills me the most. And I will tell you, there are members of Congress willing to work in a bipartisan manner. I do have Republican colleagues, and most of them are retiring because they've been challenged from the far right, especially after redistricting. And so I am going to try to get as much done on a bipartisan basis before some of these really reasonable, open Republicans leave Congress for good. And I'll give you an example. I have this bill that was introduced by my predecessor, by my friend and our former Congressman, Beto O'Rourke, and it's called the American Families United Act. Well, the American Families United Act, just in a nutshell, here's what it does. If you, as an American citizen, are married to a non-citizen, and this mostly impacts Mexicans, Mexican spouses, but if you are married to, let's say, a Mexican citizen who at some point in time came across the border at our ports, and you know how when you're driving through the ports, you say American, everybody in the car will say American as CBP is checking you. If at some point your spouse, who might be a Mexican citizen, said American, your spouse is barred for life from ever asking for, you could not ever sponsor your spouse for citizenship. So there are thousands of American families that are living this nightmare where this one spouse is an American citizen And the American citizen basically gives up his or her life in America to go live with a family somewhere else. What American Families United would do, that bill, is it would allow judges discretion to make a decision on a case-by-case basis about whether they should or should not be barred for life. So it doesn't automatically let them off the hook, but it allows a judge to hear them out. What if this happened when your spouse was a child and still barred for life? You know, a judge might look favorably and say, you know what, you deserve a chance. So this bill has gone nowhere every year since Congressman O'Rourke was in office. So this year, like, I have been hounding my committee, the Judiciary Committee, begging for what's called a markup, you know, to get it marked up with amendments and get it to the floor and voted on. Well, the only bills that we really get marked up are those with bipartisan support. For 3 years now, I've had a hard time getting a Republican to co-sponsor it. Well, there are 2 retiring members of the Republican Party. We went on the trip together, this bipartisan trip to Europe and to the Ukrainian border. And as I was sitting in the plane, I sat with each one and we had hours together where they couldn't escape. And I literally told them story after story of my constituents. And at the end of the trip, I asked them, would you please co-sponsor my bill? And they both did. And I'm now probably going to get a markup. And so it may go to the floor. On that trip was also a Republican U.S. Senator. I spent a lot of time, he's also retiring. I spent a lot of time talking to him about immigration reform and ways we could do it better. And at the end of the trip, I asked him, would you give me time when we're in DC together so I can walk you through kind of my vision for what we could do on a bipartisan basis? He said yes, and I'll be meeting with him when I get back to DC. So I'm going to do my best to try to work with the Republican colleagues who are willing, but unfortunately, those who are the most reasonable are on their way out because they have been challenged by the far right. And with that, I know we are super out of time. Mr. Stepp, and to everyone on this Teams meeting, I just want to tell you what a privilege it was to be here with all of you, how much I enjoyed our conversation, and just how honored I am to work for you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Really appreciate you taking the time today to come and share so many interesting stories with us. And really, I'm sure the students learned a lot today. Thank you very much.
I hope so. Thank you all.
Both.
Thank you, Ms. Escobar, and thanks again for everything you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Work hard.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Congresswoman.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Stepp.
Thank
No
you so
problem.
much. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Have a
I
nice
hope
day,
you all
Mr.
enjoyed it. This is recorded. I didn't get the first like 5 minutes, but I had a lot of things in my mind. So I will make this into a YouTube video and I will share that. Attendance wise, I have taken an attendance record. Myra, were you able to take pictures of the attendance as well? I don't think we need it because I've got the Excel document. I'm looking through it right now. He's covered. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, everybody, if you have my class, I'll see you tomorrow. Well, if you have it in person. Thank you all for attending.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And if
Thank
you
you, sir.
have any questions, you want to recommend somebody to speak in the future, you have my email. Once again, jstepp@epcc.edu. And once again, this is part of the Building El Paso Strong series, sponsored by the EPCC Government Discipline. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye, sir. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye. Thank you.
See you
Take care.
tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day.